Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Free Thinkers Forum, Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. This is episode 23, and we're rejoined by Sarah Ohmer. She's an
Hi.
associate professor of Latin American Studies, African American Studies, and Women's Studies at Lehman College in Bronx, New York. I think it's part of a larger city, a larger system called CUNY, which is the
Mhm.
City University of New York system.
That's right.
And Lehman College predates that, right?
It might, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, she's coming back to rejoin us, and we have a little bit more to talk about, expanding on our first episode. We talked a little bit about the African diaspora the first time around. This time around,
Hmm.
we're going to talk more about Brazil, U.S. Correlations and differences, maybe
Hmm.
from a cultural standpoint. And we might delve into a few of her articles as well that I mentioned on the last pod. Welcome to the show again, Sarah, and thanks for accepting the invitation.
Hey, Kiko, thanks for having me for 2 episodes. I'm excited to get a little bit deeper into the research, the scholarship, and as much as I can talk about my experiences in Brazil.
Yes, I love that. And don't be fooled, audience. She's probably going to be back on again. And those details will be revealed at a later time. But let's keep them wondering and
Sweet.
curiosity for the moment. But anyway, I did want to briefly mention something that we didn't talk about the last episode. We recorded the last episode November 21st, 2022.
Hmm.
Sarah, can you tell us and the audience the significance of November the 20th in Brazil?
Yeah, I'd like actually to just talk about when I was there in 2014, 2015, the day of, and that's when I really learned about the significance of that date. So it's a date that was created. I'm not sure what the process was for that, to commemorate um, Black consciousness and possibly the anniversary of Zumbi's death. You might have to help me out with this.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track for sure, definitely.
And um, and so we, when I was there, I learned about it through experience. I just found out on Facebook people were getting together to march, and so in Sao Paulo and very likely in other cities in Brazil and other spaces in Brazil, people get together and march in recognition of Zumbi dos Palmares, who is one of the most commemorated, I'm not going to say, founding member or most important, because there are just so many individuals in what was at the time the largest Maroon community, Quilombo. So the largest society of individuals of African descent in Brazil that was functioning independent of the plantation economy. So Zumbi dos Palmares is one of the people that's most commemorated from that society, from Quilombo dos Palmares. And it's turned into a big event of celebration, gatherings, which at the time when I was in Sao Paulo, that meant we're all going to march down one of the biggest avenues in Sao Paulo, get together at this site. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember where we gathered, but I remember where it ended, and it was a plaza downtown. There was a colonial building. I really should have looked up all of the places' names. I also remember walking by the library of Mario de Andrade and thinking of, the symbolism there. Um, because, just having that many people of African descent drive past a Brazilian intellectual, um, a library named after Brazilian intellectual, and just taking over the streets, that the power in making public streets,
Mm-hmm.
um, streets of Black joy, Black life, and Black protest. There was a lot of, drums playing, chanting, gorgeous hair. I mean, I had like a series of cell phone photos of just different hairstyles, um, tunics of all different colors, all shirts with, inspiring graphics and texts on them. And, it was a vibrant time too. 2014, I think, is when the Black Lives Matter movement was gaining
Mm-hmm.
international traction. Um, with social media, people were starting to have similar protests around the world, which isn't new, right? I mean, we had this type of international movement with Free Angela Davis movement, and then before that with decolonization and all that. But I think in 2014 it was a vibrant time to be a part of a march like that on November 20th.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was a month, just like we have Black History Month here, what they have in Brazil is called Black Consciousness Month, o mês da consciência negra, which is kind of neat if you think about it, rather than thinking of history, thinking of consciousness. I love that. And I'm actually trying to get us to do that a little bit more at CUNY and in New York. And so then we would have 2 months, right? Black History Month and then Black Consciousness Month, February, November. Why not? And then October, we'd make it Afro-Latinx month and just try to
Oh
start
yeah,
taking over the whole calendar.
definitely.
Because there's no way to have everything done in a month. And the last thing I'll say is we would joke with the poets that I met there. Well, I wasn't really joking. It was more, exasperation that, and we have this in the US too, right? November becomes less and less Black Consciousness Month and more running around to do all these talks for people who have never heard about Black people or Black culture, and being very worn down.
Mm-hmm.
But that day was a day of joy, a day of gathering, a day of running into old friends after I'd been in old friends. I mean, I'd been in Sao Paulo like 3 months. But I could see also, people are like, hey, it was just very, very special. I mean, picture, a city like New York having, Black History March, and if, all of the activists and poets, intellectuals, community members, but it just come out and walk down Fifth Avenue. That's what was happening.
And so was that the only time you've been to Brazil?
Yes. Well, okay, no, I had gone a couple of years before in Rio for 2.5
Mm-hmm.
weeks for a conference. And this was the first time I lived in Brazil for an extended period of time, and the only time. I haven't been back since.
And you were in both times you were in very big areas, Sao Paulo and Rio.
Yeah.
Okay, because I want to kind of bring this in because I think I'm going to be able to get her on France Windance Twine. She published a book in 1996 called Racism in a Racial Democracy.
Mm.
And it talks a lot about this misconception of people from the outside, what they think of Brazil is
Yeah.
this beautiful coexistence of different racial groups and everything
Right.
else. And we know that that has been perpetuated,
Sure.
especially during a period in the 40s of the last century, from
Yeah.
some of the sociologists in that part of the world, really
Yeah.
internationally. Um,
And then it was, tourism branding.
exactly.
Mm.
The a perfect example with the I think it was the 2014 Olympics, and
Mm.
the Brazilian government was basically trying to
Right.
get Google to take down the favela markings on Google
Right.
Maps,
Yeah.
so they wouldn't
Yeah.
see this other part of Brazil. Uh,
Yeah. Wow.
but what stunned me about France Windance's
Wow.
Twine, her ethnographical piece, is kind of what I want you to get at as far as those 2 times you were there. Did you see anything that stood out as far as a racial coexistence and just people's perceptions towards you, being lighter skinned? Because she talks a lot about that in her book, but she was in a rural area.
Yeah. So, I had long dreadlocks at the time. So even if I wanted to try to pass, which I did not, I could not.
Mm,
Um, I always give the example of a faculty member that shared with me, she was working in one of the universities and was constantly mistaken for being a custodian. And she was an established professor in that university. Um, so that gives you an idea of the harmony that's happening in Brazil. And now we have the example of the life and death of Marielle Franco. I think it's something that a lot of people,
hmm
at least in our generation, can recall when she was assassinated. It shook the world. And I think a part of the shock was that it was Brazil, that people were not expecting that a Black woman in Brazil would have her life be as expendable as a Black woman in the United States.
mm
Um, yeah, so those are, the two drastic examples, like the of the different types of deaths that affect people of color, and primarily, I always focus on Black women.
hmm
Um, Same can be said about indigenous communities, the way they're oppressed in Brazil. Um, and what I have come to notice for the brief amount of time that I was in Brazil, it was really only 10 months. A lot of it was spent doing research, right? So reading indoors or interviewing people that I had set up meetings with. And as an American professor. So, all the privileges that comes with, the spaces I was able to navigate, with a certain role. But with that in mind, what I picked up on was, because of that narrative of the racial harmony, that's been prevalent, like you were saying, since the 40s. Um, the type of racism that I experienced, um, it's like it was palpable, but it was hard to pinpoint. You know
mm,
what I mean?
okay.
So a lot of gaslighting, microaggressions,
hmm
under the breath remarks, body language, that I would always have like a double take, like, wait, did that really just happen?
hmm
um and and then on the other side of that is just the absolute inhumane um conditions, um that people of African descent have to go through, that to me are very similar to what we're witnessing in the United States. Um, the complete disregard for people as human beings, um, whether it's from the police, in the school system, in the layout of the city, lack of access to anything you can think of. Um, and I like to always make that comparison with the United States because I think the US does this too. Like they create this narrative that, oh, like, we have the Beyoncés, we have,
Hmm.
Black middle class, we have Black politicians, we've had the civil rights. But the state of life of communities that are majority Black and Brown um, can be compared to favelas in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Maybe it's not exactly the same, but we can talk about fires breaking out in the Bronx because there's no access to heat, complete lack of access to internet, food deserts, so that it may not be, the cinematic image of the favelas of people stacked on top of each other on a
Hmm.
hill in Rio when you have like the pretty beaches at the bottom of the hill in Rio. Um, but it's comparable. And I right now, like talking to you, that's what I'm thinking about. Like we have this racial imaginary, the myth of the racialized democracy um, in Brazil, um, and then the history of segregation in the US. But both nations, in terms of the collective imaginary, have similar mechanisms at work,
Hmm.
that are trying to project a certain image of the nation, um, that's pacified, that's an image of progress, that's completely false.
I
And
love.
every day, in the news, people just get in such shock. Oh my gosh, another person was shot.
I was gonna and this comment wasn't even specifically about Black people, but when I was in Spain the last time in 2018, I
Mhm.
stayed with a person. I'm just gonna put it that way. I was teaching a class with Dawn over, a group, a study abroad program. It was just a 6 week program. And I
Mhm.
was in Spain, and I was trying to tell the person I was living with at the time. I was telling her that the United States, I actually feel more comfortable now because I was out, I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was just
Mhm.
out on the street corner. And I was telling her how I feel safer in another country than I do in my own country
Right.
because of the just not just the gun violence, but it's just it's almost the recklessness of everyday society outside of
Yeah.
what you see on television. And
Yeah.
like I was telling Jay Clark a few episodes ago, he was telling us about how most police killings and stuff aren't even broadcast. Those are
Right.
just the ones that they show you on television. And
Exactly.
so people are living these other realities that are hidden away. And so people are so caught up in those moments on television, but there are other moments going on just like every day, at the human level, just to the core. And some of the stuff you was describing earlier is hard to explain to people who aren't Black or part of a group that has been historically disenfranchised, especially when you talk about feelings, because people think that you're making things up. Oh, how do you know it's really racism? But
Yeah.
why do we have to be the burdens of proof to tell you that it's racism when we're telling you that these are realities for us, this mental, psychological anguish, like from day to day life. Like we know we feel racism because we know what it is. We've lived it for so
Yeah.
long. But it's like describing that to other people, it seems to them as something subjective. And
Yeah.
that's something that um you can't codify it. So to them they just dismiss it because you can't explain it to them on their terms.
Yeah.
And that's a very frustrating situation to deal with, because it's not just systemic. It's like you were saying, there's a lot of this microaggressive racism that happens
Yeah.
easy, especially with Black people traveling abroad. It happens so
Yeah.
often. And I think for me, Spain was like, I don't have a negative perception towards people, but most of the experiences I've had in Spain, and I've been there 4 different times, I haven't had good experiences just because there's a consistent basis of this microaggressive type racism that happens, whether it's a look in the metro or just some sort of a like you just don't belong, that kind of a look.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really scary um, to sort of compare those and contrast those experiences with the broader public because it becomes just, oh, that's Sarah's individual situation or Kiko's
Hmm.
individual problem, but what does that have to do with me? That's
Hmm.
the way a lot of the times it is portrayed in the media lens, especially.
Hmm.
Um, I did have a question to you that I think may interest you and some of the people that study what we study. I was thinking about theory in Latin America and Caribbean, especially, and just some of the writers. And I have a problem being someone who studies Black men. You know, obviously, I'm a Black man, but I study Black men. But a lot of the philosophy that is taught in the departments that are Afrocentric are still very much dominated by men. Like, even though I know that's not the case, because
Hmm.
I do know enough about women's ideology and stuff to understand that there's another frame of thought. Do you have a comment about why that is the way it is even now in 2022 when we talk about this prioritization of masculine voices in these departments? And then could you enlighten
Hmm.
the audience to tell some of the most influential women writers and theorists for you in the region?
Oh, those are two great questions. I'm gonna keep it brief because I know we have a couple more topics to cover
Okay.
in 30 minutes. You know, the first thought that comes to mind to me is um, it's it's just going to take time um, for disciplines to change, right? For the canon to be reshaped. And it's surprising too, because a lot of the faculty are not necessarily men, but the curricula remain very masculine or male oriented. um Whether it's your introduction to African American studies or like it's just it continues to follow a pattern that's just been accepted up until now. I don't know though if it's worth generalizing that much. um and I think it comes down to individual instructors, faculty members to make decisions. So, we can have a curriculum that doesn't say gender and sexuality, but we can choose in our survey classes, or, different courses to include those at the forefront. It doesn't have to be, oh, like, my students need to learn the whole history and then
Mhm.
we can tackle gender. You can approach them together. And if you're not an expert in gender and sexuality, guess what? You have the skills to do the research, to include different voices. Um, you know, some go-tos I think would be definitely Lelia Gonzalez coins the term Africa, and whose work is translated in the latest issue that I had the honor of co-editing with Dr. Saunders and Luciani Ramos Silva. So her essay is in the issue of Women's Studies Quarterly. It's called Solidao. It came out in 2021, fall 2021, and I can share the link with you so you can listed on your podcast.
Definitely. I
So
appreciate
that's
it.
Lilia Gonzalez. And then the other big reference for Brazil is Sueli Carneiro. And, both of them are social scientists. So Lilia was in anthropology and Sueli is in sociology. And then I like to reference the contemporaries. So Ochi Curiel, who's from the Dominican Republic and living in Bolivia at this time, that does great work in decolonial thinking and gender and sexuality and race, right? Intersectional approaches to decolonial thinking. And Yuderquis Espinosa, who's also from the Dominican Republic. Tanya Saunders, who's US based, but focuses on Cuba. And then the people that you and I both know, Don Duke does phenomenal work on Black women writers in Latin America, and Jerome Branch also, he focuses on, more, I want to say currents, kind of like meta currents in literature and Black studies in Latin America. I mean, those are just a few off the top of my head, but there's so many that are coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, that have been publishing forever, but are just now getting recognized in Brazil by main publishing presses, because all of a sudden Black studies has become something that can sell. So now they're curious to publish those books. So yeah, those are just a few I can think of off the top of my head.
The one person that I really can think of, because freshly writing a dissertation, Jamila Ribeiro.
Oh yeah, that would be
Jamila
one
Ribeiro,
example
I
of
use
the
a lot of her stuff because
recent
of
contemporary.
yeah, and clearly, and especially the bell hooks, like that whole line of thought, a lot of the intersectional analyses. So audience, there's a lot of collaboration, if you will. I think if you're doing it the right way, as Sarah was mentioning, even if I'm doing Black men, to me, I wouldn't have been able to complete my project without the influential white women, the Black women, the Indigenous women writers and theorists. You almost have to get the information from the women, even if you're studying the Black man or anyone else, because a lot of the men did not have the theory basis, and gender has become this big area of it's almost exploited now, because everyone, it seems like, is going into Black studies now. Like people who I know like had no sort of expertise in it are kind of positioning themselves as one of those people now.
They're curious and interested, and people are realizing, wow, I really have to learn this and know about this and stay current. Yeah.
But I did want to get into a little bit of your articles before we depart, because I know you got places to go and I do too. The Krump article is the one that really amazed me when I was looking at my notes. Her article is called "In the Beginning Was Body Language, Clowning and Krump as Spiritual Healing and Resistance." And I confess that I didn't even know what Krump was until I read your article. That's a beautiful article, by the way. And your other one is as well, "The Making and Silencing of Axé-ocracy in Brazil." Both of these articles I'm going to link in the episode description. But what is Krump to the audience that doesn't understand? And how did you tie that into a larger framework of Black people internationally?
Yeah, so it's, if you can think of breakdancing, right? That's something I think that everybody can think of, and twerking, right? Everybody knows about twerking. So it's a type of dance that came out of Hollywood. And if you were to watch people Krump, you could it it looks like the entire body is going through vibration. Some people might not be used to the aesthetic and think it looks aggressive or violent. And it utilizes a lot of isolated movements, which means the chest and arms could be moving in one way while the lower part of the abdomen and the legs could be moving another way. It's been featured in more popular videos. I think that some Krump dancers were in videos with Madonna.
Oh, okay.
So I think people have seen it, just might not know that there was a name to it. The way for me that it connects to the greater African diaspora is through dance and the function that dance plays for the young adults of Hollywood, right? So a lot of the movements and the techniques are similar to Afro-Caribbean dance movements and West African dance movements. And then the role that the dance is playing in these communities for these people, the way they describe it, right, is it's healing, it builds solidarity, it channels out all of the aggression that's directed towards them, gives them a sense of agency, empowerment, and a voice.
I love that.
So yeah, it just helps enact community building and spiritual resistance, which is one of the arguments that I make in the article.
And has this Krump dancing, has this expanded outside of the Hollywood area, or is that pretty much
I think so. Yeah, I think it
California
picked
thing?
up, and I think it was even taken on by other communities. So Asian American communities were developing their own style. So just like any really just like breakdancing or any other type of like dance that's specific to hip hop or just dance in general, it does break away from where it originated, and that different people make it their own.
I like how you tied the resistance aspect into it, because one of my parts of my dissertation had to do with generational traumas, and Krump is a recognition, and you're saying that this is a conscious connection to the trauma, the historical trauma of Black people, that is something that's very conscious in the movements.
Wait, repeat that?
You're saying that Krump is very much conscious of that resistance that's symbolized through the historical trauma of Black people, and so that it's almost like a liberation movement in a way. Because I know when you said twerking, and I know some of the comments that I was watching on some of these videos, some of the people were kind of like turned off by it, but that was defeating the purpose of what you're describing. Is this is meant to be liberating, it's not meant to be sexualized, it's meant to be an expression for people.
Yeah, and I have a quote from Dragon in the article too that says, a lot of people think, oh, these kids out there are just heathen thugs. No, what we are is oppressed. So they definitely have that consciousness of what is happening around them, the way society needs their bodies to be, and how they get to circumvent that through the dance.
Okay, I do want to transition briefly over to the other article that I referred to, which is the making and silencing of Axé-ocracy in Brazil.
Yeah.
The one part of the article that really it caused a lot of I don't know what it caused to me. I was upset, obviously, but I'm not surprised. That was that part you wrote in the article about a panel with Christiana Sobral and how they were
Yeah.
basically hidden in plain sight. Like, what was that
Yeah.
exactly about?
Right. Right. So, um, so this article is actually similar to the Krump article, except rather than talking about dance, I start to talk about poetry and literature and the spiritual empowerment that occurs through poetry and literature, to the point that it is carving out a space for another type of citizenship and social order. And so
Mhm.
that's where the Axé, which means spirit, Axé-ocracy comes from. So it's creating a social order based on spirit, tied to um, African diasporic religions. We talked about that in the last episode, and how that is liberating in a context of a nation that erases any opportunities to really participate in civil society. And so the example that I give is very telling of the reality in Sao Paulo and in other spaces in Brazil. So it was a literature festival, and it's Flique Sampa. Every year they have this festival, and that year they were commemorating the anniversary of Carolina Maria Jesus, who's canonical Black woman writer in Brazil, very much recognized throughout the country and internationally. She's been translated, and her diaries have been translated in multiple languages. So the Palmares University, that's a majority Black university, was hosting the event, and it had all of these facades of, this is really going to be honoring Black literature and Black culture in Brazil. But then when I got there, I quickly realized it was honoring um, Black culture that was not from Brazil. So the what's shocking to you and me, because these are foundational authors and really important when we talk about Black Brazilian literature. Conceição Evaristo is basically like the Toni Morrison
Mm-hmm.
of Brazil. Hasn't gotten all the recognition that Toni Morrison has, but she has that caliber for sure. And Cristiane Sobral, who's also very prolific. I think she's maybe 20 years younger than Conceição, a very prolific Black
Mm-hmm.
writer. And they were just set aside in a room that was very hard to find, and a time slot, I think it was like 9 or 10 a.m. At a festival that's honoring a Black woman writer like Carolina Maria Jesus. Was just preposterous, really. And it was just another example of how society really treats Black women as disposable. We can sweep them under the rug. We don't have to. We can recognize them once they're dead, which is the case of Carolina Maria Jesus. And then the ones who are still alive, let's just put them over here in a room over there. And then, the West African writers and the US American writers, let's glorify them and make sure their books are front and
Is
center.
that exactly what happened? So,
Yeah.
and this is strong because we're talking about Brazil, the largest Black population outside of Nigeria, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
and that happened in apparently the most Black country in Latin America, and
Exactly.
and you had prolific writers. I mean, it shouldn't matter even the public nature of the writer, but in this case, we're talking about two crucial voices in the literary space, and um,
Yeah.
and it happened at a Black university. I didn't even really, I overlooked that
It was
until you brought that
organized
up.
by Black University. Yeah.
Okay, it was organized by them.
It's called, the university is called Palmares.
Parmati's.
I don't know if it's a historically Black or majority Black, but
Mm,
the name of the university references, the Quilombo, Zumbi dos Palmares that we were talking about at the beginning of the episode.
mm-hmm.
But, despite that type of violence, these writers are very much selling their books and getting translated in different languages, and they've created a wide network and inspired, you know, an insane number of younger Black women writers. So it's a really exciting time if anyone's listening. Really exciting time to learn Portuguese, to travel down to Brazil, to connect with these writers on Facebook, on Instagram. They're always doing lives, streaming, and it's just a really exciting time to create more of those bridges between wherever you're listening, and Sao Paulo and Rio and other parts of Brazil. Um, there's really no excuses at this point. I mean, even the language doesn't have to be a barrier because we have, you know, translators online, and just all these ways that we can connect, or connect visually and just listen. If you're speaking Spanish, you can still listen and read Portuguese, and just open yourself up to the possibility um, of connecting deeply, and you'll be surprised. I was surprised. I didn't read Portuguese when I first read poetry by Conceição Evaristo, but it hit me, so just open yourself up to it, and make an effort to connect.
Do you have time for one more question? I promise it's just one question. You don't? Okay, we will save that until another time,
Yeah.
because I'm glad that you said no in a way, because it probably would have went 15, 20 minutes over.
Yeah.
I didn't want you to be late to your next engagement. But Sarah, I really appreciate you coming back on. I
Yeah,
might as
this
well
is
let the
so
cat out of the
great.
bag. Sarah's coming back on at another time, but I do want you to give the audience, if someone had a question and want to contact you directly, what would be the easiest way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me online very easily if you look me up, SarahOhm, like Mary ER, Sarah Ohmer, CUNY, CUNY, Lehman College, LEHMAN College, and then you'll see my page there with my email, a link to my website, and everything else.
Okay, uh, Dr. Ohmer, I appreciate you rejoining us again.
Kiko, this
And
is so great. And congrats again on the
thank
podcast.
you.
It's
No problem. Yeah, it's
going
going a lot
so
better than
well.
I
I'm
thought
so
it
happy
would.
for you.
Thank you so much. We will see you back in April. Hopefully,
Yes,
that's the
I'm
plan anyway,
excited.
audience. So,
All right.
talk to y'all soon, beautiful people. Have a great day.
All right. Bye, everybody.